In this video, we continue our discussion on Chapter 2, where our topic will be product markets. In today's video, make note of the concepts of market states, equilibrium, and changes in equilibrium. To begin, we have been developing supply and demand to talk about price and quantity determination within markets, where we have been using the product market for a single good or service as our base case, where for the product market of a single good or service, such as for a particular protein powder, consumers are the buyer, and we have fleshed out their behavior with demand, and firms are the producer and seller, where we have fleshed out their behavior through supply. Now we want to put the two together and see what we can find. All right, so we have our product market graph on the right, where we have price on the vertical axis, and we have quantity of the good or service on the horizontal axis. We're going to draw our supply and demand graphs and see what we can observe. First, let us draw our upward sloping supply curve. Remember that the supply curve slopes upwards due to the law of supply, a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, where a business will compare the price they can sell a good versus the cost to make that good, where holding costs the same, if they can charge a higher price, then that means profits will go up, where that is the want of a firm. Well, that goes with their wants, so they're going to want to make and sell more of that good or service. This contrasts with the demand curve, the buying behavior of us as consumers for a good or service, where the law of demand says that there is a negative relationship between the price of an item and quantity demanded of that item. Well, when we are considering an item, we compare the satisfaction or the utility that we get from the good or service versus the price to purchase that item. Okay, well, holding satisfaction the same, if the price on the item goes up, then we are going to be less willing to make the purchase, therefore quantity demanded will fall. So we have differing interests in terms of how we respond to price. Businesses will want to make more if price goes up, whereas we want to buy less if price goes up. Okay, so we have our two curves, and let's just have a three-state world. And what I mean by that is, let us just consider three different price points and see what we can notice. First, what happens if the business were to charge on this item a price of P1? Traveling horizontally, we are going to intersect the red supply curve first. So then that means businesses in this market are going to offer a QS1 amount of that good or service. However, if we start traveling to the right, we'll notice that we'll intersect the blue demand curve, where at a price of P1, consumers in the market are going to demand, they're going to be willing and able to purchase a QD1 amount of this good or service. Well, here we have consumers who are willing and able to make the purchase, asking for more of the good than what's available in terms of what businesses are willing and able to provide. Well, this gives us one market state. When quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, this is going to result in something known as a shortage. This is just saying that there is not enough of good or service in question. This is going to happen graphically whenever the blue demand curve is to the right of the red supply curve. And that's going to give us this space here that I'm putting in purple in shortage. Okay, well, the business has supplied a QS1 amount of their good. They have sold out and they have people asking for more of their good. Well, how can they solve this problem? Well, a solution would be to increase the price on their good or service. If they do so, law of supply, there's a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. They're going to want to make and sell more of that good or service. Whereas on the other hand, if we're looking at demand, law of demand, there's a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Consumers are going to want to purchase less. Well, keeping things simple, so we're going to consider three different points. If they got things just right, and I'm going to put price increase here. So if there's a shortage, businesses have incentive to raise the price on their good or service. They're going to want to provide more. Consumers are going to want to buy less. If they got it just right, which seems pretty tricky, say they charged a price of P2, let's see what happens. Well, at a price of P2, they are no longer in a shortage, and this is where quantity supplied is going to be at QS2, but that's going to be the same place where quantity demanded is happening. I'm going to put that as QD2. This is a particularly special part of the market in that we have reached equilibrium. At equilibrium, we have quantity demanded equaling quantity supplied, where there is just enough of that good, just enough of good or service in the market. We have consumers asking for a specific amount of a good. Businesses are offering that specific amount. So unlike the shortage, we don't have people asking for more. And like we'll see momentarily, we don't have extra goods lying on the store shelves of our markets. Okay, well, it seems unlikely that the business will get there in their first go-ahead in terms of raising prices. It could be the case that they raise their prices and they're still in a shortage, or it could be they overshot on raising their prices. And let's consider our third state and see what happens. Let's just say they overshot and have decided to charge a price of P3. Well, if they would have done this, notice that in this case, and it doesn't have to be this way, it just happens to be the way that I ended up drawing where the P3 price was, is that quantity demanded is going to be where QS1 was. Whoops, I'm going to put that as QD3, not QD1. And then if we travel further to the right, we are then going to intersect the red supply curve, where same thing. This just happens to be where I drew P3. It does not have to be this case always, where in this case QD1 is going to equal QS3. But then we run into the supply curve where businesses are going to be offering a QS3 amount of their good or service. Well, in this case, the red supply curve is to the right of the blue demand curve. Here, we have quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. This gives us the opposite state of the world compared to a shortage. A shortage was when there wasn't enough of the item. Here, there is too much of good or service. So consumers are asking for a QD3 amount of the good or service. They purchase it from store shelves, and there's still going to be some number of that item left over on the store shelf. Okay, well, this means there's too much. In order to get rid of that, what incentive does a business have to get rid of that item? They're going to lower the price on that good or service. Where law of supply, they then have incentive to have a reduction in quantity supplied. Law of demand, price goes down, we're going to see an increase in quantity demanded. Okay, so opposite of a shortage. Price goes down. So notice that equilibrium happens at one point. However, if it's never not in, if the market is not in equilibrium, if it's in a surplus, there's incentive for prices to go down, which tries to push the market back to equilibrium. And if the market is in a shortage, there's incentive for prices to rise to go back to equilibrium as well. This is what makes equilibrium so special. Equilibrium is the unique price point and quantity level where there's no excess demand or supply. As mentioned, at this point of equilibrium, I'm going to put EQ for that, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. If a business has made 5 of this item at a price of P0, consumers are asking for 5 of that item. They're not asking for 7, and there's not enough, and businesses are not making 7 while consumers are asking for 5, so there's a leftover amount on the store shelves. There's just enough to go around. And we have seen that If the market is ever not in this state, such as in a surplus, there is incentive for price to go down. And if there is a shortage, there is incentive to price to go up. And this is the market mechanism. Price as a signaling device, or a way for consumers and businesses to talk to each other so that we can become compatible with each other, or to meet each other in the middle, or equilibrium. Okay, that's interesting. Well, a market may not always be in equilibrium, but it has a way of finding its way to equilibrium. Well, once a market reaches equilibrium, is it guaranteed to stay there forever? The answer is absolutely not. We live in a dynamic world, or we live in a world of things constantly changing. When we discussed supply and demand, we saw that there was changes in demand and changes in supply. The change in our ability or willingness to buy or sell. Well, if that happens, that's going to be reflected in a change in the market, where we very well can see a change in price and quantity as well. That's what we want to look at next, and that's what's going to be a change in equilibrium. So the way that we'll do this is we'll do two examples. One example with a change in demand, and one example with a change in supply. Okay, so let us start with our demand example, and I will use purple to draw our second demand curve. Okay, so suppose that we're considering some good or service, and there was a successful advertising campaign that made consumers value a good or more, value the good more. So the factors of demand were price, ability, and willingness. The advertising campaign makes the consumer value the good more. So price is staying the same. The value they place on that good is increasing, so additional satisfaction. So they are more willing to purchase the product. So we should expect to see an increase in demand with price staying the same. So let us model what's going on in the world. Okay, so we have item number one. The product market is in equilibrium, and I'm going to call this point A over here. So at A, we are at a quantity level of Q0 and a price level of P0. All right, so then the advertising campaign, hit. It was successful. Consumers have made their change. All right, so it is going to be a positive change in demand. So we're going to see a rightward shift in the demand curve. And like I did with the changes in demand and supply sections in the previous videos, drawing arrows and drawing some notations to let you or any reader know what's going on is pretty beneficial. So the original demand curve in blue, D0, the new demand curve in purple, D1, and some arrows going to the right. All right, so the demand curve shifts right. All right, now let's see what happens. Okay, well, price has not changed. Price is still at P0. If price is at P0, well then notice we have some number. I'm going to put this as QD1, and we can put QS0 here as well too. We have a QD1 amount of the item being demanded, while a QS0 amount of the item being supplied. So we have more people demanding the item than what's being supplied. This is putting the market into a shortage. And then I'll erase those little notes. And then with that shortage, okay, so the business has sold out, people are still asking for more. So then there is incentive, and then for that shortage, I'll do that so you have some reference. They have incentive to raise the price on the good or service. Well, if they raise the price to P1, law of supply. Price goes up, a factor of supply. Law of supply tells us that quantity supplied will go up. When they're comparing price to cost, price goes up, more profitability, make more. So a change in quantity supplied upwards to the right. Whereas if price goes up from P0 to P1, a change in quantity demanded upwards to the left. Law of demand. Price goes up, quantity demanded will fall, because if as a consumer is comparing satisfaction to price, price goes up, satisfaction the same, less willing to make the purchase. We'll find ourselves compatible again then at a quantity level Q1. So then we have a new equilibrium, and I'm going to call this B, at point B at a quantity level Q1 and at a price level P1, where comparing A to B, we should notice that with a positive change in demand, quantity went up, and in this case, price went up. I already have the upward arrow here for price, and then going from Q0 to Q1, that's traveling right on the horizontal axis, signifying an increase. All right, and this is how we use a supply and demand graph to model a change in the world and make a prediction on how price and quantity will respond. Let's do this one more time, but with a supply example. All right, so for our supply example, the cost on a material used to produce a good has increased. So a factor of production used to make a good or service has increased. So business costs are rising. Okay, same thing. I'm going to use purple for the supply curve here. So cost of material used to produce a good has increased. Okay, cost should alert us business, even though I do have supply here as supply example, but if we were doing this for problems, one of the trickier parts is identifying, is this affecting demand or supply? All right, cost should alert us business. All right, a business compares price to cost. If price stays the same and cost has increased, then that means they are going to be less willing to supply at the same price point. So this should be a negative change in supply. All right, with that in mind, let's draw point A here, where item 1, the market here is in equilibrium at point A at a quantity level Q0 and at a price point P0. The cost of the material has gone up. At the same price P0, businesses are going to be less willing to supply the good or service. So this is going to be a leftward shift of the supply curve. And once again, drawing arrows showing what direction, also changing colors is useful too. That's why I use purple instead of red. I'm also going to put S1 so that I'm like, oh, there's S0 and there's S1. Okay. And then now let's also see what we have. Well, at the same price point P0, consumers are asking for a Q0 amount of the good or service, while businesses are now asking for this new, or excuse me, not asking, they are now making and selling this new amount of the good or service, where quantity demanded on the blue curve is going to be greater than quantity supplied on the purple curve. So this is going to result in a shortage. Well, with a shortage, this gives incentive for businesses to raise their prices. So they are going to raise their prices from P0 to P1. If there's a price increase, price is a factor of demand and supply. So we should expect changes in quantity demanded and quantity supplied, where law of supply, price goes up, quantity supplied will increase. Law of demand, price goes up, quantity demanded will decrease. We will then become compatible with each other once again at this new equilibrium, Q1, which notice this case, we're traveling to the left on the horizontal axis. And I'll draw this as point B. So then at point B, we are at Q1 and we are at P1, where comparing A to B, quantity has gone down, but price has gone up. So slightly different than what we saw with demand. Well, in that case of a positive change in demand more specifically. Okay, so now having gone through a demand and a supply example, where we'll pick up next time is by discussing labor markets.